The first thing my mother did at my graduation party was press an envelope into my hand. The second thing she did was tell me I had 10 minutes to leave her house and never come back. I still remember the way the music cut out in my head, even though the jazz playlist kept playing in the background. The clink of glasses, the polite laughter from relatives, I barely knew the smell of baked ham and lemon cake. All of it faded the moment she leaned close to my ear and said in a voice so calm it felt rehearsed, "This is where we part ways." I was 31 years old, standing in the living room where I had grown up wearing a navy blue dress I bought on clearance because I could not afford anything else. I had just earned my degree after years of night classes and double shifts, and my mother was evicting me during a celebration she insisted on hosting. Inside the envelope was $2,000 in crisp bills. Not a card, not a note, just cash. Like hush money, like a payoff. I looked at her face, searching for a crack, some sign this was a cruel joke. But Lorraine Holloway did not joke. Not when she had already made up her mind. "You can use the money to get started," she continued, her eyes scanning the room to make sure no one was close enough to hear. "A motel, a bus ticket, whatever you need. But you are not staying here tonight." I whispered, "Mom, what are you talking about?" Her smile never wavered. "Lower your voice. This is your day. No need to embarrass yourself." That was the first betrayal. Not the money, not the eviction. The way she framed it as my potential embarrassment, not her cruelty. "I want to tell you I said something sharp back, that I demanded answers, that I caused a scene. But the truth is, my throat closed. Years of swallowed words rose up all at once and blocked my voice. I stood there like a child nodding while my mother calmly erased me. The party went on around us. My younger sister Dana laughed too loudly near the kitchen island, already half drunk, her engagement ring flashing every time she lifted her glass. My uncle clapped me on the back and told me how proud my father would have been, as if that name still belonged to me. And my mother, the woman who raised me to believe family was everything, had just made me homeless. 10 minutes later, I was loading my clothes into my old sedan while guests were still arriving. If you had asked me then what I thought I had done wrong, I would not have had an answer. I had followed every rule. I stayed quiet. I helped pay bills when I could. I put my dreams on hold to take care of my grandmother when my mother said she could not handle it. I went back to school because Lorraine told me no one respected a woman without a degree. And now that I had one, she was done with me. As I drove away, the envelope sat on the passenger seat like an accusation. $2,000. Enough to survive, not enough to fight back. I checked into a cheap motel off the highway, the kind that smelled like bleach and old smoke. I sat on the bed fully dressed and stared at the wall until the sun went down. My phone buzzed once with a message from Dana. "Congrats, Mom says this is for the best." That was it. No question, no concern. Just confirmation that whatever decision had been made, it was already justified in their minds. I did not cry that night. I think some part of me shut down to survive. Instead, I replayed every moment of the last year looking for clues. The sudden coldness, the whispered phone calls my mother took in the garage, the way she insisted the house was being restructured, finances reorganized, paperwork updated. I remembered her saying casually, "Not everything is meant to be shared equally." At the time, I thought she was talking about life. Now I wondered if she meant inheritance. The Holloway house had been in our family for 3 generations. A modest place in a good neighborhood paid off long before my father died. My grandmother always said it would be split between us girls one day. But after Grandma passed, my mother took control of everything. The will, the accounts, the stories. I had trusted her. That was my second mistake. The next morning, I called the registrar to ask about job placement resources. I called an old coworker who once mentioned her firm was hiring. I made a plan because that is what I had always done when things fell apart. Keep moving, keep earning, keep quiet. But there was a question that would not leave me alone. Why now? Why throw me out on the one day meant to mark my independence, my success, my future? Late that afternoon, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Is this Mara Holloway?" a man asked. "Yes. My name is Daniel Brooks. I am an attorney in Northfield. I believe we need to talk about your grandmother." My heart began to pound. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. "Yes," he said gently. "And her estate was settled shortly after, or so I was told. But I recently came across some documents that suggest otherwise." I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. "What kind of documents?" I asked. There was a pause on the line, long enough to make my skin prickle. "A revised will," he said. one that names you, not your sister, as the primary beneficiary. The room felt suddenly too small, too quiet. "That is not possible," I said. "My mother handled everything." Another pause, this one heavier. "That," he replied, "is exactly why I'm calling you." I looked at the envelope on the nightstand. $2,000, my mother's final gift. And for the first time since the night before, I felt something other than shock or shame. I felt anger. Not loud, explosive anger. The kind that burns slow and steady, waiting for oxygen. I did not know it yet, but that phone call was the moment everything began to turn. The moment the story my family told about me started to crack. And when it finally broke open, there would be no amount of money that could buy their silence. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, calm and resolved, as she handed me that envelope. $2,000. A clean ending in her mind. By dawn, I realized something unsettling. Lorraine Holloway had not acted out of anger or impulse. She had planned this, carefully, quietly, and for a long time. The lawyer called again at 9 sharp, just as I was pouring stale motel coffee into a paper cup. "Ms. Holloway." Daniel Brooks said, his voice measured professional. "Before we go any further, I need to confirm something. Did you ever receive notice of a trust in your grandmother's name?" "No," I answered immediately. "I never even knew there was a trust." "That is consistent with what I am seeing," he replied. "Your grandmother, Eleanor Holloway, created a family trust approximately 8 years before her death. It was amended twice. The final amendment was signed 6 months before she passed." My hands tightened around the cup. "And what does it say?" Another pause. He was choosing his words, I could tell. "It states that the house, along with several investment accounts tied to the Holloway family business, were to pass to you upon her death. Your mother was named executor, not beneficiary." I stared at the stained carpet. Then how did my sister end up engaged to a man who suddenly has access to my grandmother's money? Daniel exhaled softly. "That is the question." He explained that he had represented my grandmother years earlier in a minor legal matter. When Eleanor passed, he assumed everything was handled internally. But 2 weeks ago, while reviewing archived files for another case, he noticed a discrepancy. A later filing had been submitted, removing me entirely from the trust and naming my sister Dana as sole beneficiary. The signature appeared valid at first glance, but the witness signature raised concerns. "The witness was your mother," he said, "which is highly irregular given her role as executor." I laughed, a short, hollow sound. Irregular has always been her specialty. We agreed to meet later that week. When the call ended, I sat on the bed and let the weight of it all settle. My grandmother had seen something she never said out loud but acted on, and my mother had undone it. Suddenly, memories took on new meaning. The way Grandma Eleanor used to press my hand and say, "You're the steady one." The way she once whispered, "Not everyone who smiles at you wants you to stand tall." At the time, I thought she was talking about men, or the world. I never imagined she meant her own daughter. I left the motel that afternoon and drove to the public library. I needed quiet, space, proof. Using the free computers, I pulled up property records, business filings, anything with the Holloway name on it. What I found made my stomach twist. The family business, a small but profitable property management company started by my grandfather, had been quietly transferred into a new limited liability structure. Dana's fiancé, Kyle Mercer, was listed as an officer. My mother was listed as an advisor. My name was nowhere. They had not just erased me from the family, they had replaced me. I closed my eyes and breathed through the rush of betrayal. This was not just favoritism. This was manipulation. Theft. A calculated removal. I thought about Dana's text. "Mom says this is for the best." For whose best? I drove past the Holloway house without stopping. Cars lined the street from the night before were gone, but the decorations were still there. Balloons sagged in the afternoon heat. A congratulations graduate banner hung crooked over the porch, a celebration for a daughter already discarded. That night, I stayed with a former coworker named Sheila. She was in her late 50s, sharp as glass, with a voice that could cut through nonsense in seconds. When I told her what happened, she listened without interrupting. "Your mother didn't kick you out," Sheila said finally. She cleared the board. Those words stayed with me. Over the next few days, I gathered everything I could. Old emails from my grandmother, voicemails I never deleted, photos that placed her mental clarity far beyond the date my mother claimed she had become confused. Daniel confirmed what I suspected. The amended will was filed after my grandmother's death. "Forgery. Do you want to pursue this?" he asked me during our meeting. I thought of the motel room, the envelope, my mother's smile. Yes, I said, but not loudly, not yet. If Lorraine Holloway had taught me anything, it was the power of silence, the danger of underestimating a quiet woman. Daniel nodded. Then we proceed carefully. That evening, Dana called me for the first time since the party. Mom says you're being dramatic, she said without greeting. She gave you money. She didn't have to. Did she tell you why I asked? She said you needed to grow up. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, did Grandma ever talk to you about the house? There was a pause. Why would she? That answer told me everything. After we hung up, I sat alone and let myself feel it all. The injustice, the grief, the clarity. They thought I would disappear, that I would take the money, shrink my life, and fade into a story they could rewrite. They were wrong, because what my mother did not understand was this. The night she handed me that envelope, she did not end my story. She started a reckoning, and I was done being quiet. By the end of that week, I stopped thinking of myself as someone who had been thrown out. I started thinking like someone who had been removed on purpose. That shift mattered more than I realized at the time. I moved into a short-term rental on the edge of Northfield, paid month to month, close enough to the courthouse and far enough from my mother's neighborhood that I did not have to wonder if I would run into her at the grocery store. The place was small, quiet, and anonymous. Exactly what I needed. I bought a used desk, stacked my papers neatly, and treated my life like a case file that needed organizing. Daniel advised patience. People who manipulate systems count on outrage, he told me. They expect you to react emotionally. The strongest position is preparation. So I prepared. I requested certified copies of my grandmother's medical records. I pulled bank statements that showed unusual withdrawals during the last year of her life. I found emails where my mother complained about Dana's irresponsibility, only to reverse course months later once Kyle Mercer entered the picture. Kyle was a detail that kept surfacing. He had been charming at family dinners, attentive to my mother in a way that felt excessive. He talked about growth optimization legacy, words that sounded impressive but meant control. I learned he had a history, 2 failed startups, a lawsuit quietly settled, a pattern of attaching himself to women with assets and families with money. My mother had not just chosen Dana, she had chosen a plan. The first real confrontation came unexpectedly. I was leaving Daniel's office one afternoon when I saw Lorraine Holloway across the street exiting a cafe. She looked composed, dressed in soft beige tones, her hair perfectly styled. The image of a woman with nothing to hide. Our eyes met. She hesitated, then crossed the street as if running into me had been part of her schedule. Mara, she said warmly, I was wondering when you'd stop hiding. I felt my spine straighten. I'm not hiding. I'm working. She smiled thinly. On what exactly? On understanding why my grandmother's will was altered after her death. The smile froze. People say you can tell when someone is lying. I think it's more accurate to say you can tell when someone realizes they've been seen. You're mistaken, she said. Your grandmother was confused near the end. She changed her mind. I've seen the records, I replied. She was lucid, consistent, and very clear about her intentions. Her eyes hardened. You always did think you knew better. No, I said quietly. I just trusted her. We stood there, traffic passing between us, the city indifferent to our standoff. You took the money, she said suddenly. That should have been the end of it. That was never the end, I answered. It was a payoff. Her voice dropped. Be careful, Mara. You're risking a lot over something that doesn't belong to you anymore. Something in her tone confirmed what Daniel had warned me about. She believed the paperwork made it true. That possession had replaced morality. I didn't lose anything, I said. You took it. She stepped closer. And what do you think happens if you push this family's break? Reputations suffer. Your sister's wedding could be ruined. There it was, the threat disguised as concern. I won't protect your image at the cost of my life, I said. I've already done that. For a moment, I saw something like fear flicker across her face. Then it was gone. This conversation never happened, she said, turning away. No, I replied. It just began. That night, Daniel confirmed what we had suspected. The forged will had been notarized by a man who had lost his license years earlier. The filing date was inconsistent. The chain of custody was broken. We have grounds, he said, strong ones. But we wait, I replied. He nodded. Until when? Until they are comfortable. Comfort breeds mistakes. My mother taught me that without realizing she was teaching me how to dismantle her. Over the next month, I watched quietly as plans unfolded without me. Invitations for Dana's wedding circulated. Social media posts celebrated the future of the Holloway legacy under new leadership. Kyle posted photos of himself in the office that had once belonged to my grandfather. They wanted the world to see stability. I let them. Meanwhile, Daniel filed motions. Subpoenas were prepared. A probate judge requested a hearing. The wheels began turning slow and deliberate. The hardest part was not the waiting. It was the loneliness. There were nights I questioned myself, wondered if I was being vindictive, if peace would be easier than justice. Those doubts crept in during the quiet hours when old habits whispered that endurance was the same as virtue. Then I would remember the envelope, the 10 minutes, the way my mother had smiled while ending my home. Justice, I realized, was not revenge. It was restoration. The hearing was scheduled for the week before Thanksgiving. When Daniel told me, I felt something settle inside my chest, a sense of timing so precise it felt almost deliberate. A family holiday, a courtroom, truth waiting to be spoken aloud. "Are you ready?" he asked. I thought of my grandmother, of the house, of the woman I had been when I stood silent in that living room. "Yes," I said, "this time I'm not leaving quietly." What I did not know then was that my mother had her own plan for Thanksgiving. One that involved lawyers' public appearances and a final attempt to paint me as the unstable daughter who could not be trusted. She believed she still controlled the narrative. She was wrong. And when the truth finally came out, it would not just cost her money. It would cost her everything she had built her identity on, including the daughter she thought she had already erased. Thanksgiving arrived with a sharp cold that settled into my bones. The kind of weather that makes everything feel exposed. Streets quieter than usual. Houses glowing from the inside windows, framing families gathered around tables that pretended nothing was wrong. I spent the morning alone in my rental rereading notes Daniel had prepared. Dates, signatures, contradictions, evidence stacked neatly, unemotional and precise. It was strange how something so devastating could look so orderly on paper. My phone buzzed just before noon, a group message from my mother sent to extended family. "Thanksgiving at the house this year. Dinner at 4. Family only. Family only." I stared at the words longer than I should have. 2 months earlier, she had told me I was no longer welcome in that same house. Now she was redefining family again, shaping the circle to suit her needs. Daniel called an hour later. "Just a heads up," he said. "Your mother's attorney reached out this morning. They're requesting a private settlement discussion before the hearing." I laughed, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "She's scared." "She's calculating," he corrected gently. "Fear comes later." I declined the settlement. Not because I wanted punishment, but because I wanted the truth on record. Quiet deals were how Lorraine Holloway operated, behind closed doors, in whispers. I had spent my whole life inside those whispers. I was done. Against my better judgment, I drove past the house that afternoon. Cars lined the driveway. Dana's wedding planner's SUV was parked near the curb. Through the window, I could see movement. My sister in the kitchen laughing. Kyle near the dining room gesturing like he owned the place. My mother at the head of it all, directing traffic with small, confident motions of her hand. It looked peaceful. That was the lie. I turned away before anyone saw me. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, but Lorraine could never resist controlling the moment. She called me that night. "I don't want this ugliness to define us," she said, her voice soft, almost maternal. "We should talk, just the two of us." "I'm done with private conversations," I replied. "If you have something to say it through counsel." A pause, then colder. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "You made one years ago. I'm correcting it." She hung up without another word. On Sunday, I received an email from a distant cousin I barely knew. It was a forwarded message sent by my mother painting me as unstable, resentful, mentally fragile after years of academic stress. She implied I was being manipulated by an opportunistic lawyer and that the legal challenge was a misunderstanding fueled by bitterness. I felt sick reading it, not because it surprised me, but because it worked. Replies followed quickly urging compassion, forgiveness, unity. No one asked me what happened. That night I barely slept. Monday morning the courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Daniel met me at the steps, calm as ever. "She brought witnesses," he said quietly. "Friends, a neighbor, even your sister." I nodded. Of course she did. Inside the courtroom, my mother sat with her attorney composed and dignified. Dana avoided my eyes. Kyle looked irritated, as if this were an inconvenience interrupting his schedule. When proceedings began, the judge wasted no time. The forged will was introduced, the timeline was laid out, the notarization questioned. Then Daniel called his first witness, the notary. A frail man with trembling hands admitted under oath that he had not notarized the document in question, that his stamp had been stolen years earlier, that Lorraine Holloway had approached him after his license was revoked, asking for a favor. The room shifted. My mother's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Medical records followed, testimony from my grandmother's physician confirming her mental clarity, emails surfaced, bank records, patterns too consistent to ignore. When Lorraine took the stand, she did not cry, she did not shout. She denied everything calmly, as if repetition alone could make it true. I acted in my family's best interest, she said. My older daughter was unreliable, emotionally volatile. My younger daughter needed protection. Daniel stood. Protection from what? She hesitated. Just a moment. From that moment on, everything unraveled. The judge ruled the amended will invalid, ordered a full audit of the estate, reassigned executorship to a neutral party. Dana began to cry quietly. Kyle stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. My mother sat very still. Afterward, in the hallway, she approached me. This didn't have to be public, she said. It did, I replied. You counted on silence. Her eyes searched my face as if looking for the daughter she used to control. She did not find her. By the time I left the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter. Not because it was over, but because the truth had been spoken aloud where it could no longer be reshaped. Thanksgiving had come and gone, and with it the illusion of a perfect family. What remained was accountability, and that I was learning was far more powerful than forgiveness ever had been. The days after the hearing passed in a strange, suspended quiet, the kind that follows an earthquake when the ground looks intact, but nothing feels stable anymore. The court's ruling had cracked something open, but it had not yet finished breaking, not even close. The audit began immediately. A forensic accountant was assigned to review the estate, the trust, and the family business. Daniel warned me it would be invasive. Bank records, transfers, shell accounts, years of financial decisions dragged into the light. People who hide things rarely hide just one, he said. He was right. Within a week, irregularities surfaced. Small at first, payments labeled as consulting fees that led nowhere. Property maintenance costs inflated beyond reason, then larger ones. A loan taken against the house without my grandmother's knowledge. Funds moved into accounts connected to Kyle Mercer's previous ventures. Dana called me late one night, her voice shaky. Did you know about the debt, she asked. What debt, I replied. There was silence on the line. Then Kyle says the company isn't as stable as Mom told us. He says there are gaps, that he's been covering things. Covering things. That word again. Always covering, always smoothing over cracks until the structure beneath was hollow. I didn't know, I said honestly, but I'm not surprised. She started to cry. Not the dramatic sobs I remembered from childhood, but something quieter, fractured. She promised me security, Dana said. She said this was our future. She promised herself control, I answered. You were part of the plan. Dana hung up without responding. The next blow came from an unexpected place. 2 days later, Kyle Mercer was served with notice of investigation related to his prior business dealings. The audit had uncovered links to a lawsuit he never disclosed. Misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, settled quietly years earlier. He did not come to the house that night. Instead, my mother showed up at my door. I opened it and felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Lorraine Holloway stood there without makeup, her coat unbuttoned, her posture unsteady. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not weak, just exposed. We need to talk, she said. I stepped aside and let her in. She did not sit right away. She paced the small living room, eyes scanning the space like it was evidence of my defiance. You've caused a great deal of damage, she said finally. I told the truth, I replied. The damage was already there. She turned on me. You don't understand what I did for this family. Then explain it, I said, out loud, without rewriting it. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, I saw exhaustion instead of calculation. Your sister needed help, she said. She was never strong like you. She needed stability. Kyle offered that. At what cost, I asked. Lorraine's lips pressed into a thin line. I made choices. You committed fraud, I said calmly. You stole from your own mother, and you tried to buy me off. Her eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. I was afraid, she whispered, of losing everything. And now I asked. She looked around my apartment, the thrift store furniture, the quiet resilience. Now I've lost you, she said. The words landed heavier than any accusation. I lost you the night you handed me that envelope, I said. Everything since then has just been consequences. She left without another word. The following week, the audit report was finalized. The findings were damning. Funds misappropriated, documents altered, personal expenses disguised as business costs. Kyle's involvement was undeniable. My mother's signature was everywhere. The judge issued a formal referral to the district attorney. Dana moved out of the house 2 days later. She showed up at my door with a suitcase, eyes swollen from crying. "I don't know where else to go," she said. I hesitated, not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew forgiveness without boundaries was how this all began. "You can stay," I said finally, "temporarily, but we're not pretending nothing happened." She nodded. "I know." Living together again was awkward, quiet. We moved around each other carefully like strangers learning the shape of shared space. At night I heard her crying through the thin walls. One evening she sat across from me at the small kitchen table. "I didn't know about the will," she said. "I swear. Mom told me Grandma changed her mind because you were unstable." I studied her face, the fear, the confusion, the dawning realization. "She lied to both of us," I said, "but you benefited from it." Dana swallowed hard. "I know." That was the first honest thing she had said in years. "Kyle tried to call me once." I did not answer. He left a voicemail accusing me of destroying the family, of being vindictive, of enjoying the chaos. I deleted it. The truth did not need defending anymore. By the end of the month, the court restored the original terms of my grandmother's trust. The house was placed under joint oversight pending final resolution. The family business was frozen. For the first time since my graduation party, I felt something close to relief. Not victory. Relief. But justice has a way of continuing long after you think the story should end. Because the next letter that arrived was not from the court. It was from the district attorney's office, and it was addressed to my mother, requesting her presence for questioning related to financial crimes. As I held the envelope in my hands, I understood something with startling clarity. This was no longer just about inheritance. This was about accountability. And the woman who once controlled every narrative in my life was finally about to face one she could not edit, soften, or escape. The reckoning was no longer coming. It had arrived. The morning my mother was questioned by the district attorney, the sky over Northfield was a flat, unremarkable gray. No thunder, no drama, just the kind of day where consequences arrive without ceremony. Dana sat at the kitchen table, twisting her hands around a mug of untouched coffee. She had not slept. Neither had I. "She texted me at 6, Dana said quietly. "She says this is all a misunderstanding." I did not respond. There was nothing left to misunderstand. By mid-morning, Daniel called. "They're taking this seriously," he said. "Very seriously. She's not under arrest. Yet. But they're expanding the scope." I closed my eyes. "Kyle." "Already retained counsel," Daniel replied, which usually means someone expects fallout. That afternoon the story leaked, not to the major networks, to local media. A brief article appeared online, careful with language, but unmistakable in implication. Allegations of estate fraud. A family dispute turned criminal inquiry. No names at first, but anyone in Northfield knew exactly who it was about. By evening, my phone was buzzing with messages. Old friends, distant relatives, people who had believed my mother's version without question, now asking if I was okay, if it was true, if they could help. I answered a few, then I stopped. Dana did not leave the apartment that day. She curled up on the couch, flipping through channels without watching anything. Around dusk, she finally spoke. "She always told me you were strong enough to land on your feet," she said. "I thought that was a compliment." "It was permission," I replied, "to sacrifice me." The words tasted bitter, but they were accurate. That night, I dreamed of my grandmother. She was sitting at the kitchen table in the old house folding napkins the way she used to before holidays. She looked up and smiled. "Took you long enough," she said. When I woke, my chest ached with grief I had postponed for years. The next week unfolded quickly. Kyle Mercer was officially named a person of interest in a related investigation involving financial misrepresentation. His prior settlement was reopened. His role in the Holloway business was terminated by court order. He moved out of town within days. Dana took the news silently. She built her future around him, I told Daniel during one of our check-ins. She built it on what she was told, he replied. "There's a difference." The hearing to finalize the trust restoration was scheduled for early December. In the meantime, the house remained closed. No family dinners, no gatherings. The center of our shared history sat empty like a body without breath. One evening, I received a letter addressed in my mother's familiar handwriting. I did not open it right away. When I finally did, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, bracing myself. "Mara, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. But I need you to know that everything I did believing it would keep this family intact. Your grandmother never trusted me. She favored you. I felt it every day. I told myself I was correcting an imbalance, not committing a crime. I was wrong. I see now that control is not the same as protection. And love that demands silence is not love at all. Whatever happens next, I accept it. Lorraine." I read the letter twice, then a third time. It was the closest she had ever come to accountability, but it was also incomplete, missing the one thing I needed: an apology. Not to me, to my grandmother. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. The day of the final hearing arrived quietly. The judge affirmed the original trust in full. The house was legally transferred into my name per my grandmother's wishes. The investment accounts were separated from the business and placed under independent management. Dana sat beside me in the courtroom, her shoulders tense. "I don't want the house," she whispered. "I don't deserve it." I turned to her. "It's not about deserving, it's about truth." Afterward, as we stood on the courthouse steps, reporters asked questions. I answered only one. "Why did you pursue this publicly?" I took a breath. "Because silence protects the wrong people." That night, Dana and I drove to the house together. The key felt heavier in my hand than I expected. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of old wood and lemon cleaner washed over me. Memories pressed in from every direction. Dana stood in the doorway, unsure. "You can come in," I said. "This isn't exile, it's just change." She nodded, tears slipping down her face. We walked through the rooms slowly. The living room where I had been expelled. The dining room where my grandmother used to host Thanksgiving dinners that lasted for hours. "I don't know how to fix this," Dana said. "You don't fix it all at once," I replied. "You start by telling the truth." Later that night, after Dana went to bed in the guest room, I sat alone in the living room and let the silence speak. Justice had been served, at least on paper, but family damage does not disappear with rulings. It lingers. And as I looked around the house that was now legally mine, I realized something that surprised me. Owning it did not feel like victory. It felt like responsibility, and I was only beginning to understand the cost of carrying it forward. The house did not welcome me back the way I expected. For days after the hearing, I slept poorly, waking to unfamiliar sounds that were somehow more unsettling because they were familiar. The settling of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock my grandmother used to wind every Sunday afternoon. I was home, and yet I felt like a guest walking through someone else's memories. Dana stayed quiet. She cleaned obsessively, as if order could substitute for absolution. We spoke in short exchanges about groceries, utilities, logistics, anything but the past. One morning I found her sitting at the dining table staring at a stack of unopened mail addressed to our mother. "What are you going to do with those?" I asked. She shrugged. "They're not mine." Neither was the guilt she was carrying, but it clung to her anyway. Daniel warned me that this phase would be the most deceptive. "People think justice ends with rulings," he said, "but the aftermath is where patterns either change or repeat." I began the process of untangling the business my grandfather built, meeting accountants, reviewing leases, speaking with employees who looked relieved and wary in equal measure when they realized the family drama was no longer a guessing game. One woman, a property manager in her early 60s, pulled me aside after a meeting. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said. "She always said you listened." I held on to that. The first real test came a week later. Dana received a call from our mother. I could hear Lorraine's voice through the phone, urgent, strained. Dana's hands shook as she listened. "She wants to come by," Dana said after hanging up. "She says she needs some things, personal items." I closed my eyes. I knew this moment would come. The law might have drawn lines, but emotions ignored boundaries. "She can collect her belongings," I said, with notice, and with a third party present. Dana looked at me like I had slapped her. "She's still our mother." "And I'm still her daughter," I replied. That didn't stop her before. The visit was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Daniel recommended a neutral presence. I hired an off-duty security officer, not to intimidate, to witness. Lorraine arrived in a modest sedan, not the car she used to drive. She looked older, smaller. The confidence that once wrapped around her like armor was gone. She did not acknowledge the officer. She looked at me. "This is unnecessary," she said. "So was throwing me out," I replied. She flinched, just slightly. Inside, she moved from room to room, collecting jewelry, documents, photographs. She paused in the living room, her eyes lingering on the spot where she had handed me the envelope. "I never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. I met her gaze. Intent doesn't erase impact. She nodded as if she already knew that answer. When she reached the hallway, she stopped at my grandmother's old bedroom. "She loved you more," Lorraine said suddenly. Not accusatory, just tired. "She trusted me," I replied. "That's different." Lorraine turned away. When she left, Dana collapsed into tears. "I feel like I'm losing her," she said. "You lost an illusion," I answered gently. "That hurts too." That night, I sat alone on the back steps and thought about how many women my age had been taught to endure quietly, to absorb damage for the sake of family, to confuse loyalty with self-erasure. I had done that for years. The next call came from the district attorney. Formal charges were being prepared. Fraud, forgery, abuse of fiduciary duty. Lorraine Holloway would not be spared because of her age or reputation. "Are you prepared to testify?" the assistant DA asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. The trial date was set for early spring. Word spread quickly. Sympathy shifted. People who once praised my mother's strength now spoke of her severity, of her need for control, of things they had noticed but never named. Dana withdrew further. One night she admitted something that shifted my understanding of everything. "She told me if you ever challenged her, she'd cut you off completely," Dana whispered. "She said you were dangerous when you felt wronged." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, because it was revealing. "She was afraid of me," I said. "And she should have been, not because I'm cruel, but because I remember." As winter settled in, I began hosting small dinners at the house. Not celebrations, just meals, friends, colleagues, people who knew me as I was, now not as a role assigned by someone else. The house began to breathe again. One evening as I cleared the table, Dana stood beside me. I don't know who I am without her directing everything she said. "That's not a flaw," I replied. "It's a beginning." She nodded slowly. The trial loomed. The past pressed closer. But something had shifted. For the first time in my life, I was not reacting to my family's choices. I was making my own. And that I realized was the quietest and most powerful form of revenge there is. Winter sharpened everything. The house creaked more in the cold, every sound amplified in the quiet evenings. I learned its rhythms the way you learn a new body after an injury, carefully, respectfully aware of what could still ache if pushed too hard. Some nights I slept deeply. Other nights I lay awake, listening to the wind scrape against the windows, thinking about courtrooms and family tables and how easily the two had merged. The trial date sat on my calendar like a fixed star. No matter how busy my days became, everything curved back toward it. Dana tried to find work. Interviews came and went. She returned home each time a little smaller, carrying the weight of a last name that no longer opened doors the way it used to. Once, after a particularly quiet dinner, she asked me a question I did not expect. "Do you hate her?" she said. I considered it carefully. "No, I don't trust her. There's a difference." Dana nodded, absorbing that distinction like a lifeline. In January, the district attorney's office disclosed their full case. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the forged will, but years of manipulation hidden behind technical language and family loyalty. Lorraine Holloway had not stumbled into wrongdoing. She had engineered it. Daniel prepared me for testimony. "They will try to paint you as resentful," he said, "as someone motivated by revenge." "I am motivated by truth," I replied. "Say that he told me, and mean it." The first subpoena arrived for Dana soon after. She cried when she opened it, her hands trembling. "I don't want to testify against her." "You're not testifying against her," I said. "You're testifying for what actually happened." She looked at me like she was seeing the difference for the first time. Lorraine did not contact us after that. No calls, no letters, just silence. The kind that feels less like peace and more like strategy. Then 2 weeks before the trial, something unexpected happened. A woman named Margaret Cole reached out to me through Daniel. "She worked with your grandmother," Daniel explained, "at the company for years. We met at a quiet cafe. Margaret was in her early 70s, sharp-eyed, composed. She carried a folder thick with papers. I stayed quiet for a long time," she said without preamble. "I regret that." She slid the folder toward me. Inside were copies of memos, handwritten notes, internal emails, evidence that my grandmother had expressed concern about Lorraine's behavior years before her death. Concerns about control, about pressure, about being isolated from information. She planned to change the trust because she was afraid, Margaret said. Not confused, afraid. My throat tightened. "Why didn't you say anything then?" Margaret's gaze softened. "Because women like your mother are very good at making other women doubt themselves." That sentence lodged itself deep in my chest. Margaret agreed to testify. The prosecution's case grew stronger by the day. The night before jury selection, I stood alone in the living room staring at the fireplace. I thought about the first time I ever felt truly invisible. I had been 12, watching my mother praise Dana for something I had done. I remembered telling myself it did not matter, that love was not a competition. I had been wrong. Love was not a competition. Control was. The trial began on a Monday. The courtroom was full. Reporters sat in the back, notebooks ready. Lorraine entered in a gray suit, her hair neatly styled. She did not look at me. Opening statements were clinical. The prosecution laid out a narrative of deception. The defense framed Lorraine as an overwhelmed widow making difficult decisions under pressure. When I was called to testify, my heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told my story calmly. The graduation party, the envelope, the 10 minutes, the discovery of the forged will. I did not raise my voice. I did not dramatize. I let the facts speak. On cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to provoke me. "You were living in your mother's house at 31, he said. Isn't it true you felt entitled?" "I felt safe," I replied. "There's a difference." A murmur rippled through the room. He pressed harder. "You were angry when your mother set boundaries." "She set an exit," I said, in front of witnesses. The judge instructed him to move on. Dana testified the next day. She was pale but steady. She spoke about what she had been told, what she had not known, how she had benefited without understanding the cost. When Margaret took the stand, the room went very quiet. "She trusted Mara because Mara never tried to manage her," Margaret said. She listened. The defense faltered. Then Lorraine testified. She spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of keeping the family together. She denied intent, minimized actions, framed everything as necessity. When the prosecution asked her why she never informed Mara of the trust, she hesitated. "I didn't think she could handle it," Lorraine said. That sentence hung in the air. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, certainty. The trial stretched on for days. Each night I returned home exhausted, emotionally stripped raw. Dana cooked. We ate in silence. Then one night she said something that surprised me. "No matter what happens," she said, "I'm glad you didn't disappear." So was I. When closing arguments ended, the jury retired to deliberate. I sat in the courtroom, hands folded, breathing slowly. For the first time since that graduation party, the outcome was out of my hands. And strangely, that felt like freedom. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Those 48 hours felt longer than the years that had led me there. Time stretched, warped by waiting rooms and stale coffee, and the constant awareness that everything I had survived, everything I had uncovered, was now being weighed by 12 strangers who did not know our family history, only the evidence left behind. Dana and I sat together in the courthouse hallway, speaking only when necessary. Sometimes she reached for my hand without looking at me, as if afraid eye contact might break whatever fragile truce existed between her nerves and reality. On the second afternoon, just before 3, the bailiff called us back into the courtroom. The jury had reached a verdict. Lorraine Holloway stood when the foreperson rose. Her posture was rigid, practiced. The woman who had built her life on control was holding on to the last thing she knew how to manage her appearance. The verdict was read slowly. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud, guilty on forgery, guilty on abuse of fiduciary duty. Each word landed like a measured strike. No gasps, no cries, just the sound of truth finally spoken without qualifiers. Dana covered her mouth. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, not in relief, but in recognition. This was the sound of an ending that could no longer be postponed. Lorraine did not look at me as she was led away. She looked straight ahead, as if the room itself had become something she refused to acknowledge. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed forward, voices overlapping. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. "How does it feel to see your mother convicted? Was this about revenge? Do you feel vindicated?" I answered one question. "This was about accountability," I said, "nothing more." Then I walked away. That night, Dana cried until her voice went hoarse. I held her, not as an older sister who had finally been proven right, but as a woman who understood that justice does not erase grief. It rearranges it. "She's still my mother," Dana whispered. "I know," I said. "That doesn't disappear just because the truth came out." The house felt heavier in the days that followed. Not haunted, just full. Of history, of consequences, of space that had once been filled by denial. I received messages from relatives who had stayed silent for years. Some apologized. Some tried to justify themselves. I did not respond to most of them. I had learned that closure does not require consensus. The sentencing hearing arrived on a cold morning in early spring. Lorraine was given a reduced sentence due to her age and lack of prior convictions, but it was not symbolic. It was real. Prison time followed by restitution and permanent removal from any fiduciary role. When the judge asked if I wished to make a statement, I stood. My voice did not shake. "I did not come here to punish my mother," I said. "I came here because silence nearly destroyed me, because being erased quietly is still erasure. I came here because the truth matters, even when it breaks something we wish could be preserved." Lorraine looked at me then. For the first time in months, our eyes met. There was no anger in her expression, no defense, only the hollow understanding that control had finally failed her. Afterward, Dana and I drove home in silence. Halfway there, she spoke. "I don't know who I am without her telling me," she said. "You get to find out," I replied. "That's not nothing." Spring began to touch the house in small ways. Light stayed longer in the evenings. The air softened. I opened windows that had been sealed for years. I made changes slowly. Not renovations, reclamations. I removed furniture chosen for appearances, not comfort. I framed photographs my grandmother loved, but my mother hid away. I planted herbs in the backyard where nothing had grown under Lorraine's careful supervision. One afternoon, as I sorted through old boxes in the attic, I found a notebook in my grandmother's handwriting. Inside were lists, recipes, observations, and near the back, a page with my name written carefully at the top. Mara listens. Mara waits. Mara sees things clearly when others rush to be right. Trust her. I sat on the attic floor and cried harder than I had since the day I was thrown out. Not from pain, from being seen. That summer, the house hosted its first true gathering in years. Not a performance, not a display. Just people. Laughter that did not require approval. Conversations that wandered without correction. Dana moved into her own place nearby. She began therapy. She started over slowly, honestly. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the trees, she turned to me. "You didn't just stand up for yourself," she said. "You changed everything." I shook my head. I stopped disappearing. The difference mattered. What I had not expected was how quiet revenge turned out to be. No shouting, no triumph, just the steady rebuilding of a life that had once been paused to make room for someone else's control. The story people thought this was about inheritance or betrayal or punishment. It wasn't. It was about what happens when a woman refuses to accept being written out of her own life. And that story was not finished yet. Life did not return to normal after the verdict. It settled into something quieter, heavier, and far more honest. The house no longer felt like a battleground, but it was not yet a sanctuary either. Some rooms still carried echoes of arguments that were never spoken aloud, decisions made behind closed doors. Healing, I learned, does not rush to fill empty space. It waits to be invited. I returned to work full-time, taking on a leadership role in the family business that now truly felt like stewardship rather than inheritance. Employees watched me carefully at first, measuring whether I would repeat old patterns or break them. I made a point of listening more than speaking, of explaining decisions instead of issuing them. Trust once broken does not regenerate automatically. It grows the way muscles do after injury, slowly, with effort, with discomfort. One afternoon, a senior tenant coordinator named Helen asked if she could speak with me privately. She had worked under my mother for nearly 20 years. "I almost quit 3 times, she said, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She made me feel small, like I should be grateful just to be allowed in the room. I nodded. "Why didn't you?" Helen smiled sadly. "Because I needed the job, and because I kept telling myself it wasn't personal." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I had told myself the same thing for decades. "It was personal," I said, "but it ends here." Word spread, not loudly, but steadily. The company's culture began to change, and with it my understanding of leadership. Power could be shared. Authority could be transparent. Control was not the same as competence. One evening, Daniel invited me to dinner. He had been more than an attorney by then. A witness, a steady presence who never rushed me toward closure. "You know," he said, "most people never confront something like this. They spend their lives orbiting the damage." "I almost did," I replied. He studied me for a moment. "Why didn't you?" I thought about it. Because disappearing stopped working. The call from the correctional facility came 2 weeks later. Lorraine wanted to speak with me. I stared at the phone long after the voicemail ended. I had known this moment would arrive. The question was not whether she would reach out, but whether I was ready to hear her without losing myself again. I agreed to a call with conditions. Limited time, no accusations, no rewriting. When her voice came through the receiver, it sounded thinner, older. "I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness," she said quickly. "I know better." That was new. "I wanted to tell you something before you hear it from someone else," she continued. "I've been asked to participate in a rehabilitation program. Financial ethics, accountability. They say it's mandatory, but it feels appropriate." I said nothing. "There's something else," she added. "Kyle has filed a civil claim against me. He says I misled him." I almost laughed but stopped myself. "I suppose that's fitting," I said. "Everyone wants to be the victim." She was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think being strong meant never admitting fear," Lorraine said. "I was wrong. I was afraid of becoming invisible. And I made you invisible instead." The words landed carefully, not as an apology, as an acknowledgement. "I won't pretend that fixes anything," she said. "I just didn't want to leave it unsaid." When the call ended, I sat alone in the living room and let the silence settle. I did not feel relief. I felt clarity. Forgiveness, I realized, was not something I owed. It was something I could choose or not without explanation. Dana visited later that week. She looked different, lighter. Therapy had softened her edges without dulling her awareness. "She asked about you," Dana said. "I told her you were busy." "Thank you," I replied. Dana hesitated. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" "All the time," I said. "But I don't live there anymore." Spring turned into summer. The house filled with open windows and long evenings. I hosted a small birthday dinner for myself for the first time in years. No speeches, no expectations, just presence. As I blew out the candles, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would never again confuse endurance with love. The past had taken enough. What came next would be built on truth, even when it was uncomfortable, especially then. And for the first time since that graduation party, I was not looking back to measure what I had lost. I was looking forward, finally curious about what I might become. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between utility bills and a flyer for lawn care services. Plain envelope, no return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. I did not open it right away. There was a time when anything from my mother had the power to undo me. Not because of what it said, but because of what it implied. Obligation, correction, the quiet expectation that I would bend. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. Only then did I break the seal. "Mara, I have been advised not to write to you. My attorney says it complicates things. Therapy says honesty requires risk. I am choosing the latter. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not asking for contact. I am writing because silence has been my weapon for too long, and I am trying to learn how not to use it. I see now that I built my identity on being indispensable. The problem with that kind of strength is that it cannot survive independence in others. When you no longer needed me, I felt erased. I responded by erasing you first. That is not love. It is fear dressed as authority. I do not expect you to respond. I only needed you to know that I understand finally what I did. Lorraine." I folded the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope. Something in me shifted, not softened, clarified. The next weeks were filled with ordinary things. Budget meetings, property inspections, coffee with colleagues who now spoke freely around me. I noticed how often women my mother's age apologized before expressing an opinion, as if permission had to be granted before truth could exist. I stopped allowing that in my presence. "You don't need to apologize," I would say gently. "Just say what you mean." It changed the room every time. One afternoon, Daniel called to tell me the civil suits were concluding. Kyle's claim against my mother was dismissed. He had attempted to frame himself as misled, but the paper trail told a different story. "People who partner in manipulation rarely walk away clean," Daniel said. "Neither do the people who enable them," I replied. That night, Dana came over for dinner. She had brought a small box with her wrapped in brown paper. "I found this while packing," she said. "It was in Mom's closet. I think it was meant for you." Inside was my grandmother's wedding ring. My breath caught. "She always said it would go to you," Dana added. "Mom told me she lost it." I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. That felt intentional. Dana watched me carefully. "Do you think she kept it out of spite?" "No," I said after a moment, out of fear. It represented a truth she couldn't control. Dana nodded, understanding settling into her features. As summer deepened, the house became a place of movement, not chaos, life. Friends stopped by without calling first. The backyard filled with laughter on weekends, the kind that does not check for approval before rising. One evening after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch and thought about how many versions of myself had lived inside this house. The obedient daughter, the invisible one, the expelled one, the witness. None of them had been false. They had just been incomplete. The call from the correctional facility came again. This time I answered. Lorraine's voice was steadier than before, less defensive, more measured. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "I've started writing down everything. The finances, the decisions, where the money went, not for the courts, for me." I listened. "I don't know what kind of mother I am now," she continued, "but I know what kind I was, and I don't want that version to be the last word." I thought about the ring on my finger, about my grandmother's quiet faith, about how accountability does not erase harm, but it can prevent repetition. "I hear you," I said. "That's all I can offer right now." "That's more than I deserve," she replied. "No," I said gently, "it's exactly what you've earned." When the call ended, I felt tired, not drained, finished. In the weeks that followed, I was asked to speak at a local women's association about leadership transitions in family businesses. I almost declined. Then I realized something. For years, my voice had been used against me in my absence. Now it could be used for clarity. I did not speak about my mother or the trial. I spoke about boundaries, about transparency, about how easily love becomes leverage when no one questions it. Afterward, a woman in her late 60s approached me, eyes wet. I gave my son everything she said, and I don't think he knows who he is without me. I squeezed her hand. Let him learn. It's not abandonment, it's respect. That night I slept deeply. The past no longer knocked at my door demanding explanation. It waited quietly where it belonged. And I knew that when the final chapter came, it would not be about punishment or victory. It would be about choosing what to carry forward and what to finally, deliberately lay down. The anniversary of my graduation arrived without ceremony. No banner, no speeches, no carefully curated guest list. Just a quiet morning sunlight moving slowly across the kitchen floor and the sound of coffee brewing while the house woke up around me. I thought about that night often, not with anger anymore, but with clarity. The envelope, the cash, the 10 minutes. The way my life had been reduced to something transactional, as if love could be settled with paper bills and a closed door. That memory no longer hurt the way it once did. It reminded me how far I had come. The house was officially mine now in every sense, not just legally, but emotionally. I had repainted the living room in warmer tones. I replaced the rigid furniture with pieces chosen for comfort, not appearances. The space no longer felt like a stage. It felt lived in. Dana stopped by that afternoon with groceries and news. I got the job, she said, breathless. Entry level, not glamorous, but it's mine. I smiled. That's how it starts. She hesitated, then added, I didn't tell them my last name. That mattered more than she realized. We cooked together, laughing awkwardly at first, then more freely. For the first time in our lives, there was no one monitoring the volume of our voices or correcting our opinions mid-sentence. After dinner, Dana grew quiet. She's being transferred, she said. Mom, to another facility, further away. I nodded slowly. How do you feel about that? Dana thought for a long moment, sad and relieved, and guilty for feeling relieved. All three can be true, I said. Later that evening, after Dana left, I sat alone in the living room with my grandmother's ring catching the lamplight. I thought about lineage, about how family stories get passed down not just through names and houses, but through patterns, control, silence, favoritism. Those were inheritances too. And they were the ones I was determined to end. I received one final message from Lorraine that week, short, direct. I am accepting responsibility for what I did, not because the court requires it, because I do. I did not respond, not because I was punishing her, but because my story no longer required her participation. That realization felt like freedom. The business stabilized, slowly, steadily. We sold off properties that had been acquired recklessly. We reinvested in maintenance and people and transparency. Employees began staying late again, not out of fear, but because they cared. One afternoon, Helen stopped by my office. You know, she said, smiling, this place feels different now, lighter. That's the goal, I replied. That evening, I hosted a small gathering. Friends, colleagues, a few neighbors, nothing formal. Just conversation and shared food and laughter that did not need to be managed. At one point, someone asked how I ended up here. I considered the question carefully. I stopped accepting stories that required me to disappear, I said. The room grew quiet, not uncomfortably, but thoughtfully. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch and let the quiet settle around me. I thought about how many women watching stories like mine might recognize pieces of themselves in it. The overlooked daughter, the reliable one. The woman expected to absorb injustice quietly because she was strong enough to survive it. Strength, I had learned, is not measured by how much you can endure. It is measured by what you refuse to accept. If you are listening to this and something in it feels familiar, I want you to know this. Being erased quietly is still erasure. Being handed survival money instead of dignity is still betrayal. And choosing yourself does not make you cruel. It makes you honest. I did not destroy my family. I told the truth. And the truth simply refused to stay buried. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever been made to feel invisible, disposable, or wrong for wanting fairness, I hope you stay. There are more stories like this. Stories about karma, about payback, about the moment the tables finally turn. Like the video. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you want to hear more truths that were hidden for far too long. Because silence protects the wrong people, and your story deserves to be told.